Good evening. My name is Sonia Kupri, and I am glad to welcome you to the 2022 edition of the Night of Science. This year, the Arctic Research Center, which is part of the University of Lapland, is joining force with the French Institute in Helsinki for this Night of Science. So tonight, we have with us 3 researchers, specialists of Arctic issues, who make us the honor of being with us to speak on the theme Arctic New Perspectives. After their presentation, we'll have a discussion session, so please feel free to ask any question during the presentation on the chat so that our guest researchers can answer them afterwards. Now, let me introduce you to our 3 speakers tonight. The first one is Nuccio Mazzullo, who is a senior researcher in the Anthropology Research Team at the Arctic Center. His research projects are focused, among others, on indigeneity, perception of space and territoriality, oral history and narratives, mostly in Finnish Lapland and with Sami people. Hello, Nuccio, and welcome. Our second speaker is Florian Stammler, who is a research professor in Arctic anthropology and also the coordinator of the Anthropology Research Team at Arctic Center. His research interests are in the anthropology of nomadic societies with a special focus on Arctic animal herders like reindeer, horse, or cattle herders. And he tries to capture the dynamic of Arctic societies from the point of view of the herders, as well as the interaction between the nomadic and sedentary parts of the population. Good evening, Florian. Thank you for being with us. And last but not least, we have with us Monica Tennberg, who is a political scientist and who leads the Northern Political Economy Research Group at the Arctic Center as a research professor. And her current focus is on critical perspectives to Arctic politics, in particular on urban development, water governance, climate change, and sustainable development. Thank you for being with us, Monica. So let's start with Nuccio Mazzullo, who will tell us how climate change is affecting Sami livelihood and explain to us the very special kind of relationship they have with nature and how they try to adapt in addressing the climate change challenge. Nuccio, you are welcome to start anytime, and I will just mute and turn off my video during your presentation so that we can focus on what you are telling us.
So please activate your microphone.
I'm sorry. Hello, everyone. I thought that because you had muted us, that you could also unmute us. But hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Sonia. And I'm really honored to be here together with my colleagues and to talk about reindeer herding and how this particular livelihood has been affected, particularly here in Finland. I will start immediately by sharing my screen and hopefully the right screen. Did I share it? Sorry.
We see your desktop right now. Now we see.
Can you see it? Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes, it's fine.
So, are you seeing the right screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you very much. So in my presentation, this presentation is based on several fieldworks that I have conducted from 1990 until now onwards. And I shall focus on the significance of reindeer pastoralism among Sami people of Finnish Lapland in particular, and on the importance to understand it as a subsistence that somehow reaches beyond the purely economical analysis for a more sort of holistic approach. I shall argue that reindeer herding is deeply embedded in all the different aspects of social and cultural life of the Sami people. And despite somehow its diminished economic importance, is still and nevertheless fundamental for the support of Sami culture and of its principle of sustainability. As you may know, and some of you may know definitely for sure, the Sami people are the only indigenous group in Europe. And so they actually have a special somehow role and a special position in Europe. They live in the northern part of Europe, in this part where we actually live. And their territory, which is called in their language Sapmi, it stretches upon the 4 different nation states of the north, starting from Norway to Sweden to Finland to Russia, to particularly the Kola Peninsula. Their number is always challenging because it doesn't have a particular, although the census have been made, but they roughly goes between 75,000 to 100,000, half of which about 45,000 live in Norway, 20,000 in Sweden, just over 9,000 have been growing here in Finland. In the 90s, there were about 6,000. Now they are about 10,000, and about 2,000 in Russia. The Sami language, as you can see from the map, that particular map is actually, it was originally a language map, which is now roughly overlapping with the idea of Sapmi. It's divided into 9 different languages, and the Northern Sami is the one that it's the most spoken one. To this day, let's say that the Sami subsistence economy is still very much based in the sort of in one of the most crucial concept that it's or principle that I would say that it's crucial to them, and that is the being mixed. In fact, to this day, I mean, it's not a case that actually the Sami were called the people of the 8th season, and it was precisely because of this way of exploiting resources around during the year, in the yearly cycle that they had. Furthermore, in my fieldwork, I've seen that also another important aspect, it's the Sami relation with the landscape, which I found that it's very intimate, and in that sense, validating also the principle that the landscape is very, very important in fashioning people's sense of identity, and also as a repository of their tradition. For the Sami people, the natural world is not understood as standing apart from the domain of human social life, but it's rather understood as a continuation of it. How do I turn? Yeah. So, sorry, I'm navigating between. So one of the most important things that is crucial when we look at Sami and the way actually they have understood, that they have developed this sort of way of sustainability, it's also to sort of point out the fact that in fact what they have really done from time immemorial, rather than talking about reindeer herding, the Sami have been attending their relationship with the reindeer as the animal. first through hunting, and then only a little more than 400 years, or around 400 years ago, through herding. Hence, what is really traditional in the Sami way of life is actually the relation with the reindeer, not so much the herding as such. Sami subsistence was originally based very largely on hunting, fishing, and gathering, but it was only later that it became, that they started to sort of tame animals. And the first document that actually points to this direction about the taming of draft animals, it only dates back about to the 9th century, and that's Ottar, a Norwegian trader that was giving an account to King Alfred of England. And during this time, they were using, he was mentioning that they were using reindeer for transportation. They started to tame reindeer for transportation, and then also as a decoys for hunting wild reindeer. The existence of this hunting technique is also supported by archaeological excavation, and you can see the pits in the figure 1 that they were using for this hunting. It's only like later on with the use of decoys that they were able to gather more animals, and in the figure number 2 by Knut Lem, we can see a description of how basically through the decoys were collecting these animals, and little by little sort of understood that it was possible also to herd those animals. But the development, however, of small-scale intensive herding became as one of the features of Sami culture only from the 16th century onwards. As a Sami scholar, Lehtola, argues, he says that extensive herding only developed in Finnish Lapland at the beginning of the 17th century. There are many views regarding on the reason why reindeer herding developed from the previous activity of hunting. Among the factors, of course, that influenced this process, we can mention the arrival of the farmers, the need to rely on more sort of predictable sources of income for the payment of taxes and for barter, and then also political changes and the establishment of new state borders, as well as also the decrease in the number of wild reindeers and wild game. So with respect with, how do you say, with the relationship with the reindeer, I would turn now to the next slide. Sorry, a description is given, a very poignant description actually about the relationship with the reindeer as soon as this type of wild livelihood had developed. Is actually with a description by Johan Turi, who's a Sami, the first Sami voice that speaks about Sami tradition to outsider from a Sami point of view. And it really sounds like a synthesis of the Sami relation to the animal. And it's, you can see from this quote, "Welcome my herd and take care of it, just like you have done before. Be now, little mother, my friend again, little mother, feed my reindeer well." This is a yoik, and little mother, Sami Ätnami, or Sami Ätni, how he calls it. It means Sami mother. It's a sort of very important because it shows how the understanding of the Sami about nature, it was like, and it was about as if it was the keeper. Mother Nature was the keeper of the pasture, and it was the one, it was more of, Mother Nature was more a friend, a helper, and maybe I would say a midwife, because of the way the reindeer herder were attending only at the pasture, and much of the other work. And this type of relationship, this intense relationship, both with mother herd and the reindeer, is actually has been brought forward to these days, as you can see from the next slide, where you can see the description. This is an extract from some interviews that I was doing, and we were sort of trying to figure out how Sami feel and what do they know and how close they are to the animals. And there was this Sami reindeer herder was giving me quite detailed description, not only of the color of the shaping of the antler and everything, but also about the psychological nature of each animal. And you can see, actually, I drew this kinship diagram to show really how they could actually track kinship as well to the fourth generation, really. And that's really quite telling about this intense relationship. But reindeer herding, it's not only a relationship with nature and with the animals, but it's also a social relation, very important. And here there are the sort of three main, what in my view is the three main concept, and I sort of that somehow swirls around reindeer herding. The Sami traditional cycle was actually based on these three features: the herd, which is called the yellow, the herding group, the sida, and the seasonal migration, which is the johti. The cycle revolved around the community of herders, the reindeer, and the shift between the pasture. The herd was basically the basic unit on which the herder could rely. This term in Sami, in fact, the yellow, is literally means life. It means the herd. It means wealth. It means possession. It's such a inclusive word, and just like the sida, it's also it's even more incorporating, because the sida is not the village, which has a different name. It's called gilli, and refers to settlements, sedentary settlements that had a sort of fixed dwelling place. The sida instead is somehow it incorporates the yellow together with those who tend it, and it's a sort of it cannot be dissolved, the union between the herd and the band of the herders, and so it's like the epitome, in a sense, of the social relations of herding. So that the sida incorporates people, animals, and pasture, and family as well, because it's partly overlapping with kinship as well. However, things did change and across during the history, and we can see that from an original migration pattern that would cover several hundreds of kilometers, very much like, in a sense, what my colleague Professor Stammler will speak later, probably in respect, to nenets, for instance. The Sami used to cover all those distances, but in fact, they came to a halt at some point, and due to the institution of national borders and historical changes that happens in the north, and to this, basically, what followed, it was the sorry, let's see. It was the birth of the paliskunta, of a system in Finland that apportioned the whole territory where reindeer herding could be practiced, and then created new boundaries, and so that basically the way the migration used to be done, they had to be recreated into the smaller apportioned territories of each paliskunta, of each cooperative. And as you can see in the cooperative where I was doing fieldwork, this yearly cycle was recreated, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, within the territory of a national park. So So there are also many views regarding the reasons why reindeer herding developed from the previous activity of hunting. And among the factors that influenced this process, we can also mention so the state as a big player. Another important aspect that changed in Sami reindeer herding, it was the SIDA through this particular formation of cooperatives. And so basically, I'll change the slide. There was also a great social change, and the fact that the way kinship had been developed in the north, which was based very much on a sort of bilateral type of kinship, so the taking both from the mother side and the father side, and it was exogamous, so it was actually outward looking. It was like allowing marriages across different sidas. As a matter of fact, it was very much needed alliances to create alliances, and marriage was the best way. But that had to be changed, particularly in Finland, because the creation of the cooperatives and the fact that many sidas had to come together. You can see in the diagram that in this particular cooperative, there were like 5 different sidas. You can see that something that, in a sense, shows resilience and shows sort of cultural and social adaptation to the new setting. It actually, the pattern of kinship went to endogamous and back to exogamous. So it went through a phase of marrying within the communities of the different sidas, until a bigger, and the wide circle, it stands for the bigger cooperative SIDA, until a bigger one was reached, so that then afterwards could be restarted the old system of being marrying outside and creating new new alliances. So the relationship with the landscape is another one that I wish to touch upon. As I was saying before, there is this was also part of another interview that was done by me, and it was about trying to understand how important movement and how important orientation and how important the relationship with landscape was. And as you can see from the left side, the amount of names actually that came from during this interview, it was so much, but it was like embedded. It was like an episode of narrative in a sense, I thought, and it was a way of re-traveling and re-performing the journey that had been done over and over again. So that basically the way they can move, and in the picture on the right-hand side, you can see a normal instance of winter herding with a group where I was working with, and it was in complete snowstorm with nothing, no clue whatsoever of where we were, at least from my point of view. But for them, it was like the knowledge of how the terrain was actually unfolding below the snowmobile. They could actually follow, as if it was like with a GPS, they could actually follow the precise spot where they were and where to stop and so on. And so the reason why actually then we stopped and then we returned back home, it was because of the visibility, that they couldn't see the reindeer, not really because they wouldn't know where they were. So here is again another example of intimacy of the practitioners, the reindeer herders, and the land. And here is a bit of a sort of synthesis of that, and how through this reenactment of journeys, actually, these patterns of movement were actually made available also to others, along with a list of different names. And the list of names would only occur only through these reenacted journeys. And also about the concept of home, it was another part that I thought it was very important, and the fact that they could claim that the home is there, right there in the forest, and it was really like quite clearly the sort of enfolding of the space through the setting up of a temporary teepee and the putting up of the fire that would bring everything under a focus, literal focus of their attention. So the changes that have occurred throughout reindeer herding, they can be summed up by this slide, and basically we can see that there is almost like a move in sort of a move back to the original state when the situation was like when livelihood was more on the hunting side nowadays, because through from hunting moving through pastoralism, the pastoralism, it really implied a very intense relationship with the herd and moving together with the herd. We are now at the stage where of course the reindeer herders are all settled and in villages and so on, and therefore the distance has increased, but the distance to reach is covered with new technologies. So in that sense, shortening again. I'll just go very quickly through this cycle, which is like a way of maximizing, if we want, the resources available through the whole yearly cycle of the reindeer. They basically start with a summer, with a month of the cows, which is the miestemanno in May, and the livelihood sort of unfolds from that onwards through these phases: the summer calving and marking, which is like when comparison and assigning property happens, which is like when the calves are tagged and then assigned to each single mother reindeer and through by reading the year mark. Interestingly enough, this thing actually wasn't. This is clearly an adaptation to a new condition and to actually the existence of the cooperatives, to the institution of the cooperatives. It wasn't such. I mean, when they were moving with the herd, usually the marking was done as the reindeer were giving birth, and then it wasn't really so much important, the ear mark, as much as it is now, because now they are all herded together as a group activity. Therefore, the ear mark need to be quite clear, and they take into consideration, of course, the mistakes, and that's why the comparison is done. They sit around a tree, like you can see, and they call each number of the tag, and then the property is actually assessed. If only one name comes out and someone says, it's my reindeer, that one, that little one, then is assigned to the person. If not, if two owners shout the same number, therefore then they go and check. So they find the owner. Once the owner is found, then you can finally grab and untag calves, and then you can write your earmark as the young man is doing on the right hand side on the reindeer. The next phase is the winter herding, and basically it's to manage basically the pasture. It's most of it. It's like to check where the reindeer are, managing the pasture so that they actually have enough to eat. And then the separation is the moment when the reindeer are brought back to the corral for the slaughter season. Here again, the traditional winter slaughter is something of a different type compared to the modern one. You can see in the upper part, the normal traditional winter slaughter completely embedded into the social fabric of the Sida, where children go and see and participate, and the hides of the reindeer are put aside for future use of garments and clothing. Whereas you can see below something that sounds very much of a comparison as with forestry, where the reindeer are stuck inside this slaughterhouse and ready for the consumer to use them. And just like you can see on the right, the trees. So the alienation that it's actually happening between one case and the other, between the social embedded slaughter and alienation, it's quite clearly something that doesn't point at sustainability as such, at least at the cultural and social sustainability, because knowledge is being produced and reproduced in the upper part through the participation of the whole group and not of single people. One other major threat to sustainability has been experienced by the Sami reindeer herders because of compulsory, what has become almost a necessity, and that is the winter feeding, the spring, late spring feeding. And that's something that it wasn't the case before because of the climatic condition. I mean, in the 90s, I did my first fieldworks in the 90s, and I remember it was very much different. The type of snow, the type of work plans that the reindeer herders were doing, in where to go and how and which routes they would take. I think already in the 97, which was the first time I participated to an emergency feeding, it was because of the icing. Basically what happens is like with the temperatures going up and down very quickly, and that in periods of the year of the season, of the winter season, they are completely unexpected, like January, February, like now. What happens is like through the amount of snow, it forms different layers of ice, which then the reindeer is not able to break through during the sort of digging process when it moves around for feeding and breaks and goes down all the way down through the snow to search for lichens. And so when in 97, what happened, it was like quite a few thousand animals were lost, and we had to take those hay bales to the mountains where the reindeer were at the time, where normally they would have eaten lichens, and they couldn't. And so if we think about climate change as a threat, it's definitely one of them. And so not only in social, but also in real terms and threatening directly the herd. But the point is, it's also threatening, culturally speaking, and biologically speaking, the animals, because the reindeer have been changing because of that. And the reindeer herders where I was working, they didn't really like that. They didn't like the fact that the reindeer are becoming somehow more domesticated and more keen on and prone on waiting for extra feeding rather than going themselves and search for that. I mean, one of them sort of most pride was taken by reindeer herder. It was to actually say that my herd is actually really wild, in a sense that it was able to look after itself. Now, to sum up a little bit the stages of development of the Sami reindeer herding, we can see that the first part of it is actually very much hunting until the between 16th and 18th century, where finally they start to gather reindeer and herd them. Then the changes that have been happening afterwards is actually been more about increasing the velocity, the speed with which they were able to reach the herds, and particularly in the Finnish case through the cooperatives. What we actually face nowadays is actually more a phase in which it's still extensive as a reindeer herding type, but it's becoming more and more remote, and particularly with the use of GPS and Google Maps and drones. It's on the one hand trying to be more sustainable, because it's possible to do less trips to the places where the reindeers are, and less trips to actually look for them. And it's still like it feels like, you know, that the relationship is becoming weaker, and that's what they are mostly afraid. On the other hand, to actually put a GPS collar, it actually needs a lot of knowledge about the type of reindeer. I mean, if you remember when I was mentioning those three reindeers and the description and how the reindeer herder was talking about some of them as leaders and some of them not really as leaders, and so on. And so you actually want to put the GPS collar onto a leader so that you know where all the rest of the herd is actually moving. So that skills and knowledge is still there. And then the knowledge of the landscape and the places where the reindeer are grazing is still hugely important in the choices that you make. But in terms of physicality between the reindeer herders and reindeer, this remoteness is actually quite felt. Now, one more aspect of this, it's this relation with the forest. It's also came through to me through another project that was called Powers Technology Production of Space. And it was about this conflict over overlapping resources and the need for the aim and for sustainability. The case was particularly in a village of the northeastern part of Finland, where we went to look. And it was like there were some reindeer herders who were wanted to use certain parts of the forest as grazing land, and the institution that was harvesting the forest there was seen as trees and forest as commercial forest, and here you can actually see the different understanding of these nature values that because just for an example of in the ads that I show there. The idea that someone can see the forest for the trees, it really sounds very much that the forest has a different use value compared to what the reindeer herders were doing. And in fact, what the reindeer herder is doing with the help of a green activist, a Greenpeace activist, it was like to say, this is not a commercial forest as you actually depict in the map, where everything is highly structured and all the resources are already allocated and apportioned. But this is a grazing land, and it's a particularly important grazing land because of a particular type of food that you can find here that you cannot find elsewhere. So in this sense, the different understanding of the different actors that are operating on the same grazing land where Sami reindeer herders are operating, it is somehow undermining the very idea of sustainability. And particularly in this forest conflict in Nelin, what came to me, it was the heavy use of maps and the fact that everyone was writing on this map, where the reindeer herders were describing me on the top picture, where the reindeer were, how they were moving, what type of grazing land is that particular part, and so on. On the other hand, as we saw in the previous map, everything had already been apportioned, and so somehow it was already decided what the use of that particular forest. What is it? It's really like, so all those lines can be drawn and redrawn on maps, but as a friend and colleague of mine, Timo Kumpula from the University of Eastern Finland once sent me a map because we were having a discussion about this thing, and he said, oh, I have actually something for you. And he showed me these two pictures taken, one in 1979 and the other one in 2005, of the same area in the same region, in this particularly in this area where the conflict was. And it shows really the increase of forest growth. It's really like amazing. But the point is that forest growth, what they do to reindeer herding, is a crucial impact, because what the reindeer can then finally, the amount of distances that can be covered in already existing roads network, like the forest road, is so huge that the reindeer herders are not anymore able to forecast where are they moving, nor are they able to control the movement of the herd as such, that they are completely unpredictable. And then, of course, let alone the amount of grazing land that actually is lost through that particular process. So yeah, so with this, I think I'm quite done. I would like to maybe, like I had put down some conclusion. What is important is to emphasize that traditional Sami subsistence has never been based on one particular activity, but has spanned according to the season, from hunting to fishing to gathering and to herding. Since the Sami approach to use of natural resources has been the holistic attitude of incorporating the various elements of the relation with the environment, both in economic and cultural ways. Political and border changes have also brought, as we have seen, changes in the patterns of migration, particularly with respect to the Finnish case. And as I have shown from the maps, early migration patterns between Finland and the coast were brought to an end with the introduction of the reindeer herding cooperatives. And so we have seen how those patterns have been recreated. Similarly, also there have been changes with the CEDA. So what actually takes is that what the reindeer herders had to do, they had been asked to become more and more flexible, but the flexibility, at least in the terms that was suggested by Stammler and Beach, has become minimal due to the increased necessity that reindeer herders find to have to rationalize. In fact, at the reindeer herd separation that I have been, whereas the Sami in the past, the Sami herders used to separate reindeer according to the principle of which animal has the best chance of survival over winter, judged by condition of its teeth and so on, and whether it has fat. Nowadays, they are compelled to adopt an official rationalizing principle for the herding cooperative that is dictated by usually the Ministry of Agriculture. And that is based on the carrying capacity of, on the number of the reindeer population, over the carrying capacity of its pasture. And so any increase in this or decrease, it will impact heavily all the other natural repercussion on the other factors. So the natural way, as the reindeer herders used to describe it, it was that in the older times, if reindeer were too many, then the reindeer men, no matter how skillful they were, they would not be able to keep the herd together. And so some of the reindeer would have gone astray, or like they were saying, they would have gone back to nature, or they would have joined wild herd at the time when there were wild herds, or simply they would have become so weak that they would have become then prey to wild animals. The imposition of stringent slaughter percentages indexes has actually the effect of limiting and mortifying the herder's judgment and the principle on how to make a choice when confronting the reindeer during the separation in the corral. Hence, instead of seeing a calf, a miesi, like they say, or German, as a calf, they must see it as a head and take decision accordingly. Nowadays, the Sami people may have only few reindeer, but they keep them because they regard them as important for their identity and for their language. And they are regarded by all the generation as a fundamental strategy in order to bridge the modern Sami society to its traditional values. More and more herders recognize the importance of Sami culture to keep its connection to reindeer herding alive. And this is why herders have increasingly defined the reindeer herding subsistence not just as an economic activity, but also as a cultural one. Hence, in order to understand the resilience of herders who stay in a subsistence that may be seen as marginal or not as a full activity, or at times also as a low profit activity, one could then answer this question as another reindeer herder told me once, that reindeer herding is a way of living and not a way to make a living. And in this is encapsulating the very nature of the Sami worldview. And I think maybe I can finish here.
Well, thank you very much, Nuccio. This was very enlightening and very interesting to see this very special relationship Sami people have with the nature and with their environment, and how it builds their social identity, and how they keep on adapting their way of living to the changing external conditions, and also how they try to keep their tradition and their some traditional patterns in their groups and their way of life. Well, thank you very much, Nuccio.
Thank you.
I will now give the floor to Florian Stammler, who will tell us how the study of Arctic nomadism can inform us about the ways in which we, as humans, can reshape our relations to our surroundings in a more sustainable way. So, Florian, you are welcome to start whenever.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this interesting event. And Nutra has already told us quite a bit about the settings in which people coexist with reindeer. And this presentation is built a little bit as a pair of this. And I would like you to introduce to some of the research that we've been doing in the Russian Arctic. Most of my research is about that. And I'm going to share with you some thoughts on how the study of these relations between people, animals, and the environments can also inform our thinking about sustainable livelihoods in the Arctic. And like Nutra, I'm also an anthropologist, and I'm going to do this presentation from the point of view of an anthropologist. So I just thought, since we have a general audience, I explain that anthropology is really the science of human cultural and social diversity and similarity across the planet. So we study what forms of human social life we can find on this planet, and what are the factors that influence these forms of life, and how diverse or similar these forms are across groups of people, locations, states, ecological habitats, and climatic zones. So obviously there are some basics that every group of people leading a particular way of life needs to ensure. For example, people need to eat something all over the planet. People need to have a shelter to live under, need to satisfy their basic health conditions, reproduce, have appropriate clothing, and so on. But there are many different ways of ensuring these basics. And these are culturally and socially different. And then on top of these basic needs, people have a lot of more elaborate needs, desires, hopes, fears, and anxieties in their lives that are also influenced by their culturally embedded forms of life and their relations to their surrounding natural and social environments. And so this is what anthropologists study. And this is why you will now get a different perspective on some similar things from myself, based on a different region than what Nutra has told us about Finnish Lapland. So what I would like to suggest in this presentation and try to show you in the following is that the description of how people actually live on the land in real time today in the 21st century can teach us already quite a bit for our own life too, on how we can organize ourselves sustainable on this planet. And when anthropologists describe the life that they live with people in the field, they call this ethnography. So on the following slides, you will see a lot of photographs from my own living with Yamal and its nomads in West Siberia, which is the red little dot on the map that you see here on the slide. And all those photos are taken in the last 2 years. And actually the last photos I just did 3 weeks ago when I was celebrating New Year's with the reindeer herders in the tundra, which you see here. There are some cases of environments that you cannot just ignore. And I think the Arctic is one of these cases of environments that you cannot ignore. And it is because for human inhabitation, these environments bear some challenges. For example, the challenge of dealing with the cold. On this photo, the temperature was around 42 degrees minus. I have lived myself for 30 years in more temperate environments before moving to Rovaniemi at the Arctic Circle. And I've noticed myself that when you live there, every day when you stand up, the first thing to do is checking the weather, the temperature, the precipitation, the daylight, all these environmental variables that I have never checked myself when I lived in Cambridge or in Germany before. Because these things actually have a real impact on your everyday life. And I think this is something that makes life in the Arctic different from other places with a more temperate climate. We can give a fancy sounding scientific name to this rather banal finding. And I would like to call this the corporeality of the Arctic. So it's the physical conditions of life that actually counts in the Arctic. One of the most obvious factors for that is temperature. It's cold and people need to invent appropriate shelter from that cold. Here you see one way of shelter in the form of the nomadic tent. In Sami, it's called the lavo. In Nenets, It's called the mya, and in Russian, the chum. Temperature and daylight in the Arctic obviously influence also what kind of vegetation grows there and how much of it grows there and how fast. And this means that the corporeality of the Arctic determines also what you can do on the land. And for example, growing plants and this kind of sedentary agriculture is one way of life that does not in these Arctic ice deserts, you cannot really grow any plants anymore. So what did people do for inventing ways of adapting and living sustainable in these environments? Nutra has told us already, the best known invention is herding reindeer. Many of the people in the Eurasian Arctic do that. But they did not invent that in the North American Arctic, for example, where there is also a cold climate. And this is what tells us about the necessity to actually study these cultural specific forms. My examples today come from this West Siberian group called the Yamal-Lenites, and they nowadays hold the world's largest domestic reindeer herds. And they still live in that pastoralist relation with the reindeer that Nutra was talking about and showing on one of his slides, where he said that the Sami are ranchers by now, the Lenites are still pastoralists, which means they live with the reindeer around the year, round the clock, basically. One could say in Nutra's last diagram, if you remember, which had that these 8 stages, I think the Lenites are now at stage 4, the intensive herding. The basic starting point for this relation of people with their animals is domestication. And this is a topic that we currently study together also with Nutra in a project by the Finnish Academy called Wild Realities. Domestication is a relation that's ongoing, and already Zeuner in 1963 argued that the domestication is a meeting ground where the media of the 2 species, the humans and the animals, overlaps. And in the case of this reindeer, Zeuner had already argued in the 1960s that the meeting ground is constituted by a common mobile relation to space. And that mobile relation to space among the Lenites, you can see that particularly well. It's enacted through migration of people and reindeer together through the landscape. So I invite you to look carefully at this picture. The nice thing about living with the Yamal-Lenites is that you can actually see this relation unfolding in real time when you are there and feel that relation yourself, rather than having to rely on archival materials or interviewing people only. And from there, actually, you can understand and even feel with your own body what it means when, for example, colleagues like Charles Stepanov, a famous French anthropologist, writes that the migration is the territory as it is perceived and memorized by humans and animals, forming a shared nomadic landscape. In most reindeer herding settings, this physical relations of people to the land was or is mediated by the reindeer. And if you look carefully at the sledge and the woman, you see that is the reindeer feet that touch the ground, whereas the human sits on a sledge. So the human is actually not touching the ground, him or herself. It's the reindeer who touches the ground. So the reindeer mediates the physical relation between people and the land. And you can see that really well. In much of Europe, as Nutra has shown us, this physical relation is basically lost because nowadays reindeer herders use snowmobiles, quadricycles, Menkea, powered by imported energy, which we may say is inherently less sustainable, but sometimes more efficient. A mobile relation to space, of course, is a crucial determinant of people's relation to environment in the Arctic, and originally most human inhabitants in the Arctic had nomadic ways of life. In the Yamal-Lenites case, that you can still observe how they cover thousands of kilometers every year. But unfortunately, like it or not, the colonization of the Arctic by states with capitals in the south, such as Helsinki, sorry to say that, has led to the decline of that mobile relation of Arctic peoples to their environment. There are actually very few people left who still have that fully nomadic way of life like the Nenads have. Sedentarization, so the process of becoming settled, is a rather common phenomenon for nomads worldwide, not only for the Arctic. And it's not necessarily one that helps sustainability. And the reason for that is that when you settle in an environment where the resources are scarce, for example, the plants, they are not dense, they are scattered, and the growing period is slow, or the water resources are scarce, you're actually well advised to use a vast territory to feed yourself and your animals. That relation, that ecological relation of nomadism has been observed already back in the 70s in Dyson Hudson and Smith's economic defendability model of nomadism. So it's not new, but it's a very basic relation that rather than having your animals graze in one spot all the time and not having the pastures available anymore next year, you change the pastures all the time and you're able to come back. For doing that, you need to drive your reindeer to new places all the time, and that's what you see on this picture. Of course, people in cities like this, these are the majority of the Arctic population today, also rely on animals to feed on. And if you look carefully at this photograph that I took just, I took it actually on the 30th of December, so 3 weeks ago in Salihardt, the capital of Yamal. They are putting up the logo of KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken there. So they also eat animals, but these animals are not necessarily local. And the people who eat these animals do not hurt them anymore themselves, and they do not eat their own meat. So this is an inherent sustainability challenge. Think about how much of the stuff on this picture that people use in their everyday life is imported from outside the Arctic, using a lot of resources that are neither near renewable nor produced by the people locally. So this means that nowadays, most Arctic people, even the descendants of those people who were nomads at some point, they are dependent on these outside resources that someone else produces on their behalf and then imports them there. And the local people need to pay for them. And a lot of this is, of course, a result of our states colonizing the Arctic. Settled people on one place in the Arctic spoil the environment more than the nomads did traditionally, because the land under their houses and around their houses usually cannot be used anymore to sustain animals that feed people. In such places of settlement, like on this picture, these are usually too polluted to serve as reindeer pastures or as resource givers in the more general sense in a sustainable way. On this photo is a gas deposit in Yamal, which the Nenads reindeer herders I have been living with pass by twice a year on their migration route, just by the road. Obviously, a lot of the land surrounding it is not fit for human inhabitation even anymore. So the causal chain here relating to sustainability is like this. If you import a lot of stuff to the Arctic to live there, you need a lot of energy to transport it. A lot of this energy is actually located in the Arctic on deposits like here. For example, in Yamal, 90% of the Russian gas is located. And actually Finland imports a lot of this gas. But then this gas was shipped out of the Arctic from where it's extracted to the south, and then it's used to bring back resources that are produced in the south to the Arctic. For example, tropical fruits, construction materials for these houses, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and so on. So we can say that this sort of sedentary logic that have people being located in one place and moving around the goods may be a sustainability challenge in comparison to a livelihood where actually the people and the animal move together and produce what they need locally. Just to give you some idea of how we anthropologists think sometimes theoretically. But that, of course, that sustainability of the nomads too depends on how you organize your movement and how much of renewable energy, for example, you use in that movement. For example, animal power, as you have seen on the previous slide. But this raises the question, what can we learn from making our life sustainability in the Arctic? Does one have to become a nomad to live sustainably there? I think that would be illusionary. But I'm trying to show that from living with those people, we can maybe question some of our own thinking about sustainable lifestyles. It may become more humble as we relate to people who are much better than we in using local resources efficiently. One thing that we can think about from living with nomads is the way in which we frame our relations to the environment. In our background, which is the background of all Arctic, it's the dominant way in which Arctic states have been teaching their citizens to relate to the environment, is actually inspired by the Bible. Subdue the resources of the land and extract what you can, to put it shortly. So that sees humans as superior beings in the environment, with the power to do with our surroundings what we want. And this, of course, has consequences, as we can see on our planet, for the state of the environment. So now basically that we have, with our way of life, destroyed part of our planet, now we need to reinvent sustainability in those new conditions. And we can ask ourselves, what does the study of nomadic societies like the Nenets or the Sami teach us for reinventing that sustainability? And because in the Nenets and other indigenous Arctic groups, people settings, humans are equal beings in the environment alongside animals, plants, water bodies, mountains, lakes, and also spirits. And in those people's original belief systems, there is not really a hierarchy of who is more important than whom. That means humans cannot necessarily assume that plants and animals need to sacrifice themselves for human lives. If you take from them, you also need to give to keep everything in a balance. That's at least the idea. However, we also have to admit many Arctic peoples may not even remember anymore that they had such a worldview some time ago. The Nenets, many of the Nenets elders still have, but this is also fading among the young generation. But the point here is, and in anthropology, we call this belief system animism, is that every being in the environment has a soul and therefore requires to be treated with respect and reciprocity. And on this picture, you'll see, for example, the spirit master of the reindeer herd among the Nenets sitting together with people in their house, in their tent. And this is actually one of those leading reindeer that Neutral has been talking about. So this is how that works. And I'm going through some of these just as photos to show you the closeness of that relation between reindeer and people, how it is enacted today. But this does not mean, however, that reindeer nomads are all sort of ecological saints. Some of them, for example, also do not separate rubbish, dispose of plastic bags in the open tundra, using more and more power generators, snowmobiles in the tundra, or they use poison for helping the reindeer to get rid of the mosquitoes in summer, as you see here. So on the one hand, this is caring about the well-being of the animal, but it's also poisoning because this stuff is highly poisonous. They used to make smoke fires in the past. But still, all these relations, they display a lot of care for the well-being of the animals, as people know that it is directly related to the well-being of the people. Here, for example, they put fabric on the road and on the sand dam of the gas deposit in order to make it easier for the reindeer to move through it so that they wouldn't strangle with their harnesses, their throats as they were hauling the household over. And also closeness, of course, does not exclude death. Because death is part of human life and it's also part of animal life. And it's normal that you kill the animals in an appropriate and respectful way. In this case, you can see here dedicated it to the spirits to enact this reciprocal relationship where it's quite normal that you eat those animals. So it's all about, it's not about sort of, in order to be sustainable, you necessarily have to become a vegetarian or things like that, as we hear sometimes from people living in big cities. But it's about respecting that every being in the environment has their own justification of existence. And this is, I think, something that we can learn really well from these people. Of course, we also can admit, and I can, as somebody who has lived for probably now after having conducted 20 years of fieldwork with the people, I spent several years with the nomads there, and there's no way I would live that way of life permanently, although I enjoy that a lot, being with them. But I also enjoy living in a big house every time I return. So that leads us to this question: what can we actually learn from our own thinking? I think one way is that the nomads in their everyday life are superior to us, thinking about what they really need, because their way of life, their mobility teaches them to become minimalist. And that's something that we can take away as sort of something that is in general maybe a good thing to think about in our affluent society. Maybe one doesn't have to be a nomad in order to implement some of this stuff. For example, in small villages in the Arctic, there are also still many people who live a lot of the resources of their own land, fish their own fish, hunt their own meat, pick their own berries and mushrooms, use bicycle more than cars, and so on and so forth. And one other thing that we can learn is that people are great in reusing stuff that gets out of order. They're great in repairing things, in reinterpreting uses of material value that they find maybe on a rubbish dump of an industrial company or something like that. For example, I've been witnessing them using old plastic pipes that they screw them under the sledges to protect the wood from being worn out too fast, something like that. So in our own households, we can actually think about a lot of this stuff as well if we want. And of course, living in Rovaniemi, for example, I can think myself, does it actually have to be the kangaroo meat from Australia that I buy? Or can it be the hirviliha, the moose meat from my neighboring hunter that I can consume? So I just thought towards the end, I share some of these examples for showing the way of thinking that living with such nomads sort of teaches us, can also influence a researcher's own life. While not at all, I'm saying that I'm an ecological saint whatsoever. My hobby is old cars, for example. So I'm anything but a saint, just as the reindeer herders are not. But it makes us think that it may be worth to appreciate that we still have these way of life around in the Arctic. It's worth investing in keeping these ways of life alive. And they can inform our own thinking about sustainability now that we need it so much in a changing climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florian. And it's good to have some hints on how to live in a maybe more sustainable way with more alterity for other beings. Well, thank you, and I will now welcome Monica Tennberg. You will tell us about post-humanist approaches to study Arctic change and governance, and how to take into account the multiplicity of human-nature relations. So, Monica, when you want, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and it was really interesting to hear my colleagues talking a bit about the same things that I'm going to talk about, but from a little bit different angle. And I hope you can see my slides okay and you can hear me okay.
Yes.
So thank you for this opportunity to share some points of my current research and also for the kind arrangements by the French Institute to make it possible for us to be here today. My presentation today aims at introducing, hopefully, some novel ideas about Arctic governance. Arctic governance refers here to complex regional cooperation with many governmental and non-governmental participants and diverse activities, including political, environmental, and scientific cooperation. These new ideas are inspired by post-human new materialist and relational philosophy-based thinking. These approaches question our mainstream worldviews, understanding of power and agency, as well as modes of governance. My presentation starts with the discussion why we need such new ideas in Arctic governance studies, and I give a short example from my recent research from city of Rovaniemi and the issue of salmon in this city. So let's start. Start with this picture. Before 1990s, the Arctic did not exist as an international region. It was dominated by great powers and their allies, geopolitical tensions, and militarization. Arctic governance has developed since 1990s, far beyond the schemes of regional and national authorities of the Arctic states, that is, Nordic countries, Russia, Canada, and the United States of America, and the policies of a few supranational bodies such as the Arctic Council and the European Union. And the Arctic is often referred today as a global Arctic. And in this recent visualization of the complexity of Arctic governance by Hans Magnusson, you can see that it is a really, really complex structure, political and economic and scientific cooperative structure that we have in the Arctic. The human-nature relationship is a constitutive feature of Arctic as an international region. International regionalism of the Arctic is truly an example of political imagination with a few common regional markers such as the concern over the vulnerable Arctic nature, global demand for natural resources, and promises of economic opportunities in the region. In these imaginaries, nature is seen as a backdrop for human activities. A map typically representing the Arctic region depicts different geographical boundaries of the region, state territories, and their borders, like here. Maps like this are widely used and circulated with consequences for how people view and understand the Arctic region and relationship inside and outside it. State-centricism, anthropocentrism, that is the human-centered view of the world, and a managerialist approach to nature as natural resources dominate these kinds of maps. Here, managerialism means that nature is seen only as natural resources. Maps like this are, of course, products of scientific and political cooperation from the last 30 years, but with historical roots in the times of polar exploration, colonialism, and modernization. In the Anthropocene, our era of increasing awareness of planetary impacts of human activities, such as climate change and loss of biodiversity, the impacts of human activities increase in frequency, magnitude, and scale in the Arctic, with impacts and consequences inside and beyond the region. In the report about the Arctic in the Anthropocene, we can find human nature relations presented like this in a very comprehensive but yet very complex way. This is from the report by Huntington and al., The Arctic in the Anthropocene, Emerging Research Questions. In natural science-based research, which is often called research about the Arctic change, it is a popular scientific way to frame current developments and discuss the future of the region as a complex set of externally driven, yet interconnected ecological, social, technological, and economical changes and their multiple consequences. The Anthropocene thinking seems to impose the Arctic only to adapt to circumstances rather than being one of choosing a future and trying to make it happen. In the current debates about the Anthropocene focused on issues like climate change and loss of biodiversity, the Arctic and its change has a central position as an example for the global community, but with a modest role to respond to these changes. The Anthropocene itself doesn't dictate any appropriate or even likely politics of response. However, there is an increasing understanding among political scientists and international relations scholars like me that revising the dominant paradigm in sustainability studies and science that separates humans from nature is seen as a powerful leverage point in pursuit of fundamental societal transformation. In our typical approach to separate the studies of Arctic change and Arctic governance, it manifests the difficulty to combine societal multiplicity with ecological diversity in a dire need in the era of Anthropocene. The problem here is the dualism. Arctic governance studies confine its analysis to mostly imagined communities of humans and assume to be separate from the natural world. On the one hand, governance studies are aware of the implications of the fragmentation of the world into multiple societies by calling wide participation by different societal actors to state-led governance, but has clearly difficulty to embrace multiple complex entanglements with nature and sees the nature in managerial, simplified terms. On the other hand, more ecologically oriented natural science-based approaches highlight the complex human-nature relations, but often view the world as essentially one entity, ignoring its societal complexity. This results in a situation where complex, long-term problems typical to the Anthropocene era, transgressing all kinds of boundaries, cannot yet be sufficiently conceptualized with the existing analytical frames and modes of governance. From another perspective to Arctic governance, inspired by post-human, new materialist and relational philosophy-based approaches, human-nature relationships are seen complex, intertwined entanglements. An entanglement refers to how people situate or order themselves in relation to nature as a myriad ways of world-making, that is, inside or using different kinds of material, practical, and ideational relationship. The main message from these diverse perspectives to Arctic governance studies is that human-nature relations are highly entangled and complex, often both scientifically and politically contested, transgressing national, regional, and international boundaries of governance in numerous ways, and blurring agency and responsibility within an increasing sense of urgency, calling for a paradigm change due to the fundamental global transformations in the Anthropocene. In practice, this means a change from the anthropocentric world towards a more comprehensive worldview, extending agency and power to non-humans, that is, to, for example, to viruses, to different species, forces of nature, and natural phenomena, and also challenging the typical rational assumptions tied to human-centered modes of governance based on human intentionality and human rule over nature. So, going from the very abstract and theoretical approach, a little bit more closer and practical. And my example comes from my home city, the city of Rovaniemi, in northern Finland near the Arctic Circle. This city, with approximately 60,000 people, is located in the river valley where two rivers meet, the Kemijoki and Ounasjoki rivers. The 550 kilometers long Kemijoki River runs through Lapland from the northern fjords to the Gulf of Bothnia, and the Ounasjoki is its tributary. Historically, the rivers have been an integral part of the urban development in the city of Rovaniemi by bringing nutrients to fields along the rivers, making the river valley good for farming, serving as a route of transport for goods, people, and especially for timber until 1991. A site for fishing salmon and other valuable fish species, a place for industrial development, especially for forestry and hydropower development. Also, the waterfronts are part of everyday life in the city of Rovaniemi, a place of recreation and festivities of the city residents in all seasons. And here is the map of the city of Rovaniemi. On the left-hand side, going up is Ounasjoki, and on the right-hand side, you can see Kemijoki running through the city center of Rovaniemi and then continuing into the Gulf of Bothnia. This urban watershed is regulated, disciplined, and governmentalized, yet contested area. There are different ideas and plans for the watershed as a source of hydropower, with plans for new power station and dam nearby, needs to better protect the city from yearly floods, and the need to improve the nature protection and introduce the salmon and other migratory fish back to the river. And those fish were lost decades ago due to the hydropower development. Based on a document analysis, study of media material, and some interviews, I have built a situational map, sort of the map of the social world of the watershed. And it's very complex, I warn you. This is the mess, this messy social world of the watershed. The local, regional, and national debates consist of many actors, issues and concerns, and governance schemes. I have marked main actors in this situational map in black. And you can see local actors, city actors, individual activists, bodies of governance, and different kinds of EU regulations there. In this situational map, in green, are marked the hydropower-related elements. Water flow and its control is important to the energy production in the Kemijoki River. The Kemijoki company owns several power stations and dams along the river. Now the plans for a new power station and dam upstream of the city of Rovaniemi in Kemijoki River in a place called Sierilä is the source of heated debate locally, regionally, and nationally. The increase of hydropower is argued to support national climate measures as part of the fulfilling the national commitments to EU climate commitments. Also, hydropower is seen as renewable energy and has a central role in balancing the electricity production in the country. Here in blue are marked the issues, actors, and concerns related to flood protection. There are yearly spring floods in both rivers, typically caused by ice dams. The development of the regional flood protection plans based on EU flood directive in 2012 and 2015 brought many concerns, controversies, and divisions among the residents, decision makers, authorities, and stakeholders to the surface about the most effective and appropriate ways to protect the city from major floods. Some of these measures were connected to hydropower development, like building a new water reservoir, power station, and dam about 80 kilometers outside Rovaniemi. In orange, I have marked those points, actors, and issues related to nature protection. While the Kemijoki River is a built river, the Ounasjoki River remains so-called free wild river. The environmental Ounasjoki movement since 1970s led to the protection of the river and the river delta near the city of Rovaniemi by national legislation in early 1980s, and it was later included in the EU Natura 2000 program. The traditional protest started with the Ounasjoki movement, with people rowing on the river with small boats, continues today against the new plans for hydropower development. One of the most controversial issues in the nature protection of the rivers is the hope to have the salmon and other migratory fish species to return to the rivers. As I said, they disappeared after the Second World War when the hydropower development started. And it is a highly controversial issue. This cartoon by Seppo Leinonen shows what the power relations are at play. The protest by the local politician and activist, Vesa Puuronen, a professor at University of Oulu, draw some graffitis on the walls of the nearby power station and dam in summer 2019 to demand the freeing of the Kemijoki River and the return of the salmon. Later, he was ordered by the court to pay compensation for the company for the damage. The return of the salmon and other migratory fish species is planned to Kemijoki and Ounasjoki rivers with the help of fish passes. The EU fish pass strategy and its national application requires such fish passes to be built. The role of the EU cannot be underestimated here. Finland has received 2 notifications from the European Commission to improve the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. Without the EU intervention, I suspect, this is my political science speculation, it would be very unlikely that the debate about the salmon and its return would have been the focus of debate as it has been in the recent years. The environmental authorities have now started a legal process against the Kemijoki company, require the power stations that they owns to build fish passages across all dams and to restore breeding areas. There is a deep disagreement whether and how the salmon and other migratory fish can be returned to the rivers between regional environmental authorities, experts, and the hydropower company. In the company view, the return of the migratory fish species with the help of fish passes and improving the quality of river water so that the fish can return is unrealistic and contradictory. It is impossible to create a natural maintained stock of migratory fish to the rivers. These are the words of the company from their statement. The debate and legal action continue locally, regionally, and nationally. And as I have lived now 30 years in Rovaniemi, I have always wondered, what is this talk about the fish? It's a never-ending story. But to conclude this presentation today, this very local example, but with regional, national, and European dimensions, is an example of the problems in Arctic governance. Who needs to be protected from whom? The options are here. To protect the hydropower company from the environmental protest, the river nature from hydropower development, the city from the floods, or hydropower development from fish pass strategy. It is also an example of our complex long-term problems typical in the Anthropocene, with transgressing all boundaries and rationalities. The current problem constellations is a result of past development policies, rationalities, and struggles, and they live today. So, from our post-human inspired perspective, the salmon can be seen as a central, powerful non-human agent in the water-society relations and a representative for other migratory fish species that are not so well known or respected. The curious dimension here is that the salmon has not been in these rivers near Rovaniemi city since late 1940s or 50s, but the yearning for the salmon and its return is strong as ever, challenging rational assumptions of governance theories and theorists. The salmon, a symbol of life in the river, its economic importance, and also seen as a remedy to past historical injustices. The emotions of loss and yearning, both individually and collectively, expressed in these discussions about the return of the salmon, are also an integral part of governance, which is changing the worldview of seeing the watershed only from the perspective of energy production, agency and power over a new non-human agent, as well as mode of governance in the region, balancing somewhat contradictory rationalities of governance. So thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Monica. This was a very complementary perspective on how to look at Arctic issues, and Arctic seems to be the place where there are multiple sets of interaction and which are influencing each other. And among those interactions, the central one is the man-nature relationship. which seems to be an essential key towards sustainability, but which is apparently difficult to defend. And do you think that it is possible to combine the different perspectives of the different actors in the Arctic governance, to combine the different perspective and to try to adopt a more respectful attitude towards all the components of the Arctic environment?
I think it's a long process and it will take step by step. I think these kinds of discussions about the key Arctic species, like the salmon, which is a pan-Arctic fish species, or the discussions and attention and about the polar bear and some other key species in the Arctic, they can sort of make space for other kinds of discussions about the human-nature relationships and bring the sort of the possibly bring the change. But this is sort of the optimistic reading of the future. Then on the other than a little bit more pessimistic is that I came into the Arctic research in early 1990s, and since then there has been this continuous discussion about how to combine scientific and somehow find ways to combine it with indigenous traditional local knowledge, and this discussion seems to be just continuing, and so I don't know, and I really would like to hear my colleagues' point of view. Do they see any point to go forward in these kinds of discussions?
Not sure, Florian. Do you want to?
I could say that. Thank you, Monica, for the presentation. I think it's really like you got us. We were talking about how things could be and how the indigenous have been adapting to these changes, because in my case, really most of the changes were from outside, borders and all kinds of things, and imposition and new regulation, they all came from outside and they continually adapted. I think for us, probably it's the only way is to start from children at school. If you actually teach them where all these resources come from, what it's needed to get them, and the respect that you should have for all the different animate and inanimate beings. Because the point is, if you don't start to tell children that we are the nature, that nature is not separate from human beings, we are part of it, and therefore preserving, or whatever you want to call conservation policies towards nature, it's all about us. It's all about us, whether we like it or not. So it's the only way, but this is a long shot. It's like almost resetting the whole system and restarting anew. So I don't know whether any government is actually willing to go that step forward. One short-term influence, it could be here in the north, and Monica probably, it's like, I don't know what you think, but I think it's like the moment when some of the consultative bodies, institutions that are here from the indigenous point of view will actually reach the level of decision-making and the ability of making those informed decisions about how to use resources will have an impact on the government, and not the other way around. So I think it's only then we can see whether actually this indigenous local knowledge or even local communities' knowledge actually is anything more than just this is what I think, or what do you think, the sort of consultative knowledge that institutions usually get, and then they do whatever, it's in their plans. So I don't know, but I just throw these two things and see what, Florian, where do you start?
Florian?
It's obviously it's a huge question, but I maybe I would like to start with an observation, and I cover a little bit less time than Monica, but also since the 1990s, and but looking back, I think what has changed there, when we think about indigenous ways of knowing and how to incorporate them into science and so on, that like 20 years ago, there was a lot of talk about how can we incorporate indigenous knowledge into science, and the way in which this has changed now is, I think that that there's basically many of our colleagues agree that this is a wrong approach in the first place, because this is still sort of knowledge colonialism, that the scientific knowledge is dominant, and you try to match the indigenous with it, or you incorporate it somehow into your scientific models. So what is now more trendy is actually, and the University of Lapland tries to position itself as a forerunner in this, is called the co-production of knowledge. So that you actually produce the knowledge together with the people who live there, and who have the expertise that we scientists don't have, and everybody brings their own skills and expertise to the table, and then we co-produce something together that may be useful for making or meeting these sustainability challenges, or the challenges that are coming about by a changing climate, and all these things we have been talking about. So, and this is a bit newer. This co-production of knowledge thing has not been around 20 years ago so much, and it remains to be seen if this will generate some change. I would like to believe it, but as Monica, I think it depends on the situation and whose perspective we want to take, if we want to be more or less optimistic on that.
Yes, and I see the sort of the potential in co-production knowledge, but it reminds me of a presentation I heard last fall by Nicole J. Wilson from Manitoba University, who was working with these kinds of issues with scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge and ways to combine it. And I think she made a really, at least for me as the political scientist, important point that we cannot stay only at the level of knowledge, but we have to look at what kind of governance systems we have, and what kind of knowledge needs they have. And if we want to have a governance that is somehow using co-produced knowledge, the governance system has to change as well. So the knowledge and governance are very closely connected. And that means, as we come back to that, this is a huge question, and there are so many actors and bodies and interest involved. So it's in no way a simple task. But I don't want to sound too pessimistic here.
Okay.
Yeah, I would fully agree, and I think one problem with the governance is that still a lot of it is determined by the idea of a nation state that has a certain territory and boundaries that they would like to defend against intruders and trespassers, and some sort of claim of exclusivity, all of which is quite contrary to the ways in which Nucha and I have been talking about how the indigenous residents in the Arctic have partnership relations to all those beings in the environment, where they share the use of the resources, where the borders are actually not spatially determined, they are socially determined, and so on. So I share your point, Monica, that this is extremely difficult to actually pay respect, and there are quite several very, very respected colleagues who basically say we cannot really do that equally to the full extent as we would like to. Think about Paul Nadasti's work, for example, on co-management of resources, which has been such a buzzword for the last 20 years in Canada. Not co-production of knowledge, but co-management of resources. And he's basically showing that however decolonially you would try, it still doesn't work. Because basically the people are already have already inhaled or are indoctrinated by this Western managerial way of thinking resources, just in the way that states have been teaching their citizens over centuries.
Okay.
Yeah, I would still emphasize the fact that the division between nature and humans, if it's not incorporated in the policies, governance, you can see that some attempts have been made, and already after the 90s in the north here with the creation of the Barents area region, for cross cooperation, they were somehow learning from indigenous, because in local communities, they have been always cooperating across borders. They never really recognized fully those borders. And they have understood that in order to develop a community, you have to go across and reach out for the neighbors. But the point is, as long as you carry in with you this separation between humans and nature as like two different actors, you would always think of conservation, policies as something to address something which is outside, and not something that it actually touches you right from inside into your soul, right? So that it's always like the humans that, the Anthropocene works only as long as you think that humans are the only responsible for everything which is happening. This is the time of humans. But in reality, it's only a shortcut, to continue doing what we do, unless we incorporate those sort of more holistic approaches that indigenous did have, and maybe they have forgotten in some cases.
Okay, and so, to go further on this, and to is the change in the climate, the change in the environment, is it perceived differently by the Arctic people? Is there an Occidental, Western way of perceiving it, and because they don't have the same relationship with the environment, is their perception different when there are changes in it? We see that, you explained that they were adapting their way of living to any kind of changes, but I would like to know if you think that there is a difference in the way they perceive it.
I think there's huge diversity, and that diversity, of course, depends not only on whether or not somebody lives in the Arctic, but that diversity also depends a lot on the kind of social, cultural, political field that person is brought up in and educated in and lives in. As somebody doing most of my work in Russia, I noticed that time and again. These people are exposed to a completely different discourse about these things than we are in the West. And that, of course, influences the way in which we perceive these things as well. I could give you an entire talk about, for example, how the reindeer nomads in Siberia, who are actually first-hand receivers of these changes, have all kinds of explanations of why these changes happen, which are not related to the changing climate at all. Although they are the ones who deal with the icing of pastures and, with the degradation and with the flooding and with all these things. But unless you are told by the rest of the world that this is an effect of climate change, you may also have other explanations for that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not only environmental determinism that by default, when you live in the Arctic, you perceive the climate change. But it's mediated by many other factors too.
Well, I think in the case of the Sami, in the way, because I think we are more Westernly based compared to Nenes, for instance. I don't know. There is an understanding that of the poignancy of COP21 and the events that did happen. But I mean, the point is that the way they are experienced here, for people who are very skillful into adapting possibilities and skills that they have to the given conditions as they go along, they do accept them as not as a normal, but as a given. And this is what we're dealing with. And then, they try to find solution for how to avoid how to care for the herd when they are dying because of the icing, and because in a month like January, like it was some time ago, it was like a plus temperature in the tundra. I mean, it's something like unheard of, and so it's the approach is like rather than waiting for policies, they actually already hands-on. They try to figure out how to solve those problems, but it's not that they are solving, the overall problem of how we are dealing with the environment and so on. But in that sense, there is a difference compared to maybe like Westerners as we can think. That we are waiting for national government to take action. But
okay, well, thank you very much for this different approach, which showed that there are many perspectives on the way to envisage and study Arctic. And I just wanted to tell you that you have greetings from Irina Zilina, your former colleagues at the Arctic Center, and she says hello from Tromsø. So
hello.
Thank you, Irina. Yeah, she used to be an intern in our anthropology team. And remember her warmly. Greetings back to Tromsø.
Okay, and unless you want to add something, I think we can conclude here. Or do you want to say a few words each as a conclusion, maybe?
Well, I don't know. I was the first one to start. I mean, I think thank you so much, and for the lovely event, and to give us the space to actually air this our experiences. And I think what the last take on maybe would be really to go out and deconstruct, if possible, in any ways, this separation, and understand that whatever we do for nature, we do it for ourselves, and tell our children to do that. And as a really like starting point, and unless you start from there will be never any change, because there will always be interest connected and overlapping stakeholders that will push for their own profits. And so that would be one. This is what we learned from the Sami.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Florian?
Thank you. I think these are very powerful words by Nuccio. I could only reiterate them, but also maybe add that this event was a beautiful example, and it's really nice that we make that in Finland. That case that the Arctic is actually not only an early warning system for the changing climate on our planet, because that's what usually that's the message that usually we hear from natural scientists and politicians. The climate is warming at so and so many times the average degrees and so on, and then we get all these statistics and so on. But what this event beautifully showed is actually that we can not only learn from the effects of the warming climate on the natural system, we can also learn from human lives in the Arctic, on how to deal with these changes, how they influence people's societies, cultures, culturally embedded ways of living, and our own behavior on our planet. There's a lot that the Arctic, actually looking at the Arctic as examples, as almost like a natural lab, can teach us for how we survive on this planet, maybe in the future a bit better. And it's nice that we in Finland have this opportunity here to actually bring the people to the table and let them participate in that. So that I think it's an important message that the people are not just guinea pigs, where governments in the south try out different things, like damming a river or not damming, or letting the salmon go back or not, but have these people participate in these decisions and see what happens. A lot of things were messed up in the past, so why not trying to delegate some of the decision making as well?
Okay, thank you, Monica.
Yes.
You want to add something?
Yes. When we were planning this event, we had a little bit of exchange that what would be the sort of the common theme of our presentations, and the audience may have noticed that we have discussed sustainability in some way or another in all of our presentations, and hopefully yet again our presentations show that how diverse and complex issue the issue of sustainability is. But listening to these presentations, I also noticed another common theme, and unfortunately we don't have time to discuss that, but mobility of the reindeer, mobility of the people, mobility of the salmon. And also somehow I would also like to see that our understanding of Arctic would be mobile as well, so that we have not only one state-centric understanding of the Arctic, but much more complex and diverse in all possible ways. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your enlightening presentation and conclusions, and it gives us nice perspectives and also food for thought to maybe change our ways of approaching our relationship to other to our environment. So thanks a lot for this. Thank you for your participation in the Night of Science, and I wish you all a very good evening. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Ciao.